Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here actually in person. It's one thing to do these things in virtually and another to do them in person. So great to be here. So I have been asked to talk about the relationship of the U.S. government with Nepal through USAID. Let me start by saying that this is the perfect time for me to be having this conversation because I am finishing my tour here in Nepal in 2 weeks. I've now been here for 3.5 years. It's been an amazing 3.5 years. I have had this amazing privilege of traveling all over this country in all 7 provinces, many districts, many municipalities, north, middle, south, east, west, and middle. And so it's just been this amazing experience for me to get to know Nepal, its different faces, in its incredible diversity, and to meet so many people of Nepal in all their diversity. So that means that for the past few weeks, as I'm leaving here and finishing my tour, I've had a lot of time to reflect. I've had a lot of time to reflect about my experience in Nepal, about Nepal itself, and also about the relationship between our 2 countries, including our development relationship. I'm going to start by just giving you some basics. Some of you may know this. And I think there's a little chart that may be going around. United States and Nepal have a now 76-year relationship. We celebrated our 75 years, I think, about a year ago. USAID has been in Nepal for the past 60 years, as long as USAID has existed. And we have had a development relationship even before USAID existed, as part of the US operations mission. During that time, we have worked in areas like, well, actually in the early days, we did a little bit more infrastructure. We helped build some of the first roads, first airport, first nursing school and hospitals. And throughout the past 75 years of our bilateral relationships and 60 years of development assistance, a lot of the work we have been doing is your typical areas of development. Health has always been a lot of what we've done. We helped work with the government to create the female community health workers. We have worked on education. A huge part of what we do is in agriculture. So this is what we have done. What I want to talk a little bit actually today is about the evolution of what USAID have done here. And I want to put that within the context of the evolution of our own agency, of our own country and government as the United States, and also the evolution of Nepal itself. So when we first started working in Nepal, and frankly, when we first started working in a lot of countries in terms of development, it was a lot of what we do as donors. It's a lot of what we do as USAID. And that has changed along the way. We have gone from a place of doing things in the country, bringing people in with some capacity building and some training, to what we call system strengthening. So not necessarily doing the work, but working through systems to strengthen them. And we're now actually moving in a very different direction as USAID, as development partners. And we've really come from the place of doing to system strengthening to being true partners with the countries where we work. And that means that it is not USAID who does the work. It's mostly Nepal itself. It's the government itself. It's the people of the Nepal themselves. It's your own organizations. It's your own private sector. And it's your own government. And so as we moved along that line, what we now call, our administrator calls progress beyond programs. That means it is no longer about what we do in terms of projects, activities, programs. It's about these partnerships and relationships that we're building with the government. And I'll give you an example of what that has meant, at least within the current administration of USAID. How many of you have heard of the word localization? You're shaking your heads. Okay, so some of you have heard about localization. Localization ultimately means that it is the people and the government of the countries where we work who are truly in the lead. And that means everything that we do is designed with Nepalis in the lead. It is their ideas, it is their priorities, it is their way of doing things, and we are there as partners. It also means that more of our funding now goes to local entities, not international NGOs. And again, this is because we have evolved as USAID. We have been willing to take more risks. We have been willing to give up a little bit of control that we are generally used to. And it means we are trusting the country and its people more and more, so that we can actually, again, become partners, not as the doers. We're also putting more of our funding directly through the government itself. Because again, it is not USAID or US government that is really responsible for development of a country. It's the government and the people of that country themselves. So by putting more of our funding directly through the government, that means the government gets to actually do the implementation. So this is the evolution of US government and USAID in terms of how we do development. Really moving more and more towards partnering, collaborating with the countries where we work, and really more and more taking the back seat. The other thing that we do is leverage our funds with others. It means leveraging our funds with other development partners. We work incredibly closely here in Nepal with a lot of actually the other partners that have been here and have been as part of these diplomatic conclaves speaking with you. The World Bank, Asian Development Bank, European Union, the British, the Swiss, the Finns, everyone. So we work very closely so that we can leverage our funds and again, put Nepal in the lead. So that has been our evolution. But any relationship is mutual. As we evolve as the US government, Nepal has also been evolving. Nepal is a country that 75 years ago, when it started and began a relationship with the US government, and 60 years ago when USAID came in here, was a very different country than it is now. Its systems has changed, including its political system. I have seen photos of what Kathmandu looked like 50, 75 years ago. It is definitely not the Kathmandu of now. It is progressing very quickly. Infrastructure is progressing. The health system is progressing. Education system is progressing. You now have a new system, relatively new system of government, that is federalism. You have a new constitution. And so that means that as Nepal progresses and evolves, the relationship between my country and yours also has to evolve. And that really means a relationship where USAID and the US government will come here and be the providers of assistance, and Nepal, the recipients of assistance, is now at a place where it really needs to evolve into a partnership towards the same objectives of assistance. And so what that means is the government taking more responsibility in terms of creating the systems to help its population. It means the private sector also taking the initiative and also the responsibility for progressing and evolving the economic side of this country. It means the Nepali people themselves have to also evolve in terms of how they see their role in their development and their relationship with the United States. So I think as partners between the United States and Nepal, I think we really have come a long way. What I would say is that, like any relationship, including with human beings, relationship between two countries is also complicated, and it's not always easy. When we have been used to our role in a relationship, it becomes difficult to change that sometimes because we get very vested in what we see our role. And so that means perhaps it hasn't always been easy for the United States and for USAID to let go of some of that control, to allow more initiative and leadership from the local communities. And this is something that we've been working really hard to do in Nepal for the past several years. It also means that the role of the government becomes difficult to change. Because again, not just the government, but also the local institutions. Because if you have seen yourself and your role as a recipient of assistance, it also becomes difficult sometimes to not change that and take more of the leadership and to take more of the accountability and responsibility. So I think we are right now at this great place where we have incredible opportunity to change and evolve that relationship even further to one that is more equal, to one that is truly a partnership, to one that is truly a collaboration, and where we are leveraging each other's capabilities and resources to really, first of all, do what's good for the people of Nepal. And like I said in the very beginning, Nepal is an incredibly diverse country. In Kathmandu, things are moving pretty quickly. Economic development is coming quickly, but that's not the case in all of Nepal. There are places in Nepal that really do need a lot more support. And it also means that there are people in these communities that can contribute to the development of Nepal even more than they have been in the past. So I don't want to talk too long. I just wanted to give you my initial thoughts because I know there's some questions and I can dig into some of these even further. But what I would really finish with is this concept that we talk about a lot, which is inclusive development and nothing about us without us. Nepal is really an incredibly diverse country with so much energy, with so much drive, with so many ideas. Some of that drive and energy and ideas are not currently being tapped into as much as they could. And so for us as USAID, we see that as our objective and as our responsibility to make sure that that drive is brought into everything we do. And I think this is something that Nepal as a country can also tap into a little bit more. I will end there. I don't know if you want me to stand here or sit or ask questions.
Yeah, maybe you can sit and then...
I can sit, all right. But thank you all.
Thank you, Sepideh. It was very interesting. You put everything into a very, in a very comprehensive way. There are a few questions that came to my mind, and we have also received few from our audience during the registration. Like, what are the priority areas of USAID in Nepal? Like, do you see any change in recent times, say before 2008, where Nepal was not federal, but now we have federal system? So do you think with the change in political system in Nepal, before we had unitary and now we have federal, and that is one. Second, in a post-COVID, like a pre-COVID and post-COVID situation, so do you think any change in USAID priority areas when it comes to Nepal? Second is that how does USAID ensures that it is reaching to the most vulnerable and marginalized population of this country? Because you just mentioned that not all parts are developing equally. In Kathmandu, developments or economic development are faster, but it's not the case in other parts of Nepal. So how does USAID ensures that they are reaching to those who are more in need of those assistance? Third is that...
That's a lot of questions.
Third is like, how is USAID supporting Nepal to meet the challenges faced by climate change? Because that is one of the global challenges that Nepal faces. I think two of the major challenges that I personally feel in Nepal is one, gender, and second is climate change. So I think, how do you reach to the challenges that Nepal meets in terms of climate change? And lastly, and you have an experience of working in different parts of the world. You have been in US. So how easy was it for you to working with Nepal? what are the major challenges that you faced in working in Nepal? Because it's completely different system, society. So, what is your experience working on that? And then maybe you can take more questions from the floor. If you want, you can sit and then.
Huh?
If you want to sit,
Or you want me to stand? Okay.
whatever you feel.
Let me stand, this way you can all see me. Okay. So, what are the priority areas? The priority areas for USAID are the priority areas for Nepal. It's ultimately, we take our cue from all of you, from the government, from the people. We cannot have different priorities for Nepal than Nepal can have priorities for itself. Because ultimately, our role here is to come to countries like Nepal and have them lead their own development journey and their own development agenda. We can only do and support what Nepal itself wants and what Nepal itself sees as a priority. Now within that, the priorities that we have identified, working with the government, working with the people, are, I'll give you some examples, but this is really not all of them. At this moment, Nepal is competing with the rest of the world in its own economic development. There are countries all across Asia that are progressing very rapidly, and they have been for the past decade or so. So one of the challenges of Nepal is to also catch up, or hopefully to do even better, to be a leader. And so this is one of our priorities, because this is something we have heard from the government. There is going to be an investment summit, a Nepal investment summit, sometime in April. This is something that is being led by the NIB, what does that stand for? Nepal Investment Board and the Ministry of Finance. And the intent of that is to bring direct foreign investment into Nepal, so that there can be more direct foreign investment, therefore more jobs for people. So that is one of our priorities, to support Nepal in its priority. Another sector which also supports economic growth is agriculture. Nepal is an incredibly agricultural society. I think 60-something% of Nepalis work in agriculture, but only about 25% of the GDP is from agriculture, which means agriculture is not an incredibly productive sector in Nepal. That means, how do we support Nepal become more productive in the agriculture sector, make more money and more, to drive its economic growth, but also to take those people who are now working in agriculture but not very efficiently to move into different sectors. Another one is tourism. Nepal is an incredible, beautiful country where a whole lot of people want to visit. But it needs a little bit of help with infrastructure to bring even more people in. IT is another one. So this is on the economic growth side. And then of course, there is health, there is education, because like many countries, including honestly mine, our education sector could use some help. So these are the priorities for USAID right now, because these are the priorities of Nepal. And whether this has changed post-COVID, I don't necessarily believe our priorities have changed post-COVID, except in one way. So COVID, as we all know, was an incredibly difficult time for everyone, which means during that time, most of what USAID did for about a year was focused on COVID, bringing commodities and equipment in, bringing in oxygen, then bringing vaccines. Nepal is one of those countries in the region, and frankly in a lot of regions, that has the highest rate of vaccination. So that took really a lot of work from us, the development partners working jointly together, but also the government. Ministry of Health worked very closely with us to make sure that Nepalis got the health support that they needed. But beyond that, again, I think development doesn't change that quickly. Your priorities 5 years ago remain your priorities today, because it's a long path, and economic development, social development continue to be the priorities, I think. And so even though we had a bump in the road during COVID, we've not gone back. The one thing that has changed a little bit is what we call global health security. I think COVID gave all of us a little bit of a kick in the behind to make us realize that these things do happen. And we have to be prepared for them a whole lot better than we all were before COVID. So one of the areas that USAID and the US government overall are very much focused on right now that we've expanded is this concept of global health security and figuring out how to get ahead of the next pandemic, to prepare for it, and hopefully to actually prevent it. So that was your first question. Okay, your second question is my favorite one. How does USAID ensure that it is reaching the most vulnerable and marginalized populations? I have to be very honest, the word ensure is a little bit too ambitious. It's very difficult to ensure that we do that. But I have to tell you, we're working really, really hard to reach as many people as possible. Like I said earlier, Nepal, like many other countries, are incredibly diverse. But that diversity also means that some people are getting more benefits of development than others. And again, like in many, many other countries, there are those who have been disadvantaged in the past in terms of based on where they live, based on their social class, ethnicity, caste, gender, all these type of things. Based on literally where they live in a country and how accessible it is for services to get to them. And so reaching as many people, including the most vulnerable, is very, very difficult in Nepal. What we have done, though, is to go back to what I said earlier, which is to put local communities in the lead for everything from the very beginning. One of the things that we do now is any money that we spend and any project that we design has to be co-designed and co-created by those communities. It's not that, and I give this example a lot, we could go into a community and say, well, we're here to help you with your water issue. We're here to help you with your health issue. What can we do? Well, and the response is going to be, well, okay, you're bringing money into a community to work on health. I'm going to tell you what I need in health. But that's no longer what we're doing. We're going to the community and saying, okay, we want to sit down with you. We want to talk to you. We want to hear from you. Tell us about your day. Tell us about what's on your mind. And at the end of that conversation, maybe water is not their biggest issue. Maybe it's something else. And so this is what we're trying to do, bringing all of these communities to really sit down with us so that they are identifying their own problems. They're telling us, well, you know what? Education for my children right now is the biggest problem. A lot of you are here from Madhesh. When I've traveled there several times, dowries are a huge problem there. How long you keep your daughter in school depends on how much dowry you have to pay. So that is a huge problem. And if you pay the dowry, you have to pay interest on that. Maybe water is a problem, but maybe this is a bigger problem. So I think this is how we're really trying to do that. And like I said, it's not easy. Ensuring is very ambitious, but we really are trying to do the best we can. And we don't just engage the communities at the very beginning. We need to engage, and we're trying to engage the communities all along the way so that we're reaching as many as possible, but we're not making decisions for them. They're making decisions for themselves. Okay, how is USAID supporting Nepal meet the challenges faced by climate change? And you said gender and climate change are some of the biggest issues. I have to say, Nepal itself has actually taken a very ambitious path towards addressing climate change itself. They have given themselves very ambitious targets. At the same time, Nepal is a country that has an incredible amount of natural resources in hydro, so that it can try to alleviate some of that by moving in that direction. What I would say about that is talk a little bit about the trade-offs that a country like Nepal really has to think about. Climate change also doesn't affect people equally. Climate change and anything like COVID impacts those who have historically been worse off even more. So climate change is already impacting those who are in communities where the water flows are changing, where things are getting warmer, where there's more monsoons. The challenge that Nepal has, though, is that it has to balance addressing climate change by bringing in more hydro, for example, by by helping communities have different practices, with the need of those communities who also have to change their lives, potentially have to move. Communities whose water flows are changing because of hydropower. So I think Nepal is already setting really ambitious and good targets for itself. But the one thing that Nepal really has to think about is how are these communities who have always already been disadvantaged by the impact of climate change are now going to be potentially impacted by Nepal's attempts to address climate change. And then finally, how easy was it for you working in Nepal? It wasn't. It wasn't. But that's not because it wasn't easy to work in Nepal. It wasn't easy to work in Nepal because development inherently is difficult in every country where I have worked. I have worked on development in Russia in the late 90s. I worked in El Salvador in development in the early 2000s. I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I worked in a lot of other countries, and now I've been working in Nepal for the past 3.5 years. Development just isn't easy. If it was easy, all the countries in the world would have already been developed. But there's a few reasons it's not easy. There's a technical side of doing development, and that's really hard enough. How do you make sure that as many children learn as well as they can in a school when there are not resources? That's really difficult. How do you make sure all the population of a country get health care? Again, when there's so many remote places across the country and funds are limited. How do you make sure that you bring new agricultural tools to a country and get people used to using them? So on the technical side, development is incredibly difficult. How do you convince private sector to come into a country where they have to choose between, okay, do I go to Nepal or do I go to Vietnam? These are very difficult questions. But that's just on the technical side. The really difficult thing about doing development in Nepal and in every country is that development is ultimately about change. It's about changing how you think, how you do things, where you see yourself within a society, where do I fit vis-a-vis somebody else? And this is the hardest thing for us as human beings. As much as human beings, we talk about change, people want to evolve. When you ask people to change, then all of a sudden it's like, who, me? You want me to change? What does it mean? And development is about incentives. Development is about interests. Development is about how people, like I said, see themselves. And the human side of change, more than the technical, is one of the hardest things of our jobs. I'll give you an example of what we've been trying to do within my own organization at USAID, here in Nepal and globally. When we talk about localization, and when we talk about the fact that localization means nothing about us without us, putting local communities in the lead, well, who can argue with the fact that this is the right thing to do? No one. It is the right thing to do. But when you try to actually implement that, that becomes very difficult because we have built habits throughout decades. We have done things a certain way, and we have seen our own worth and our own value in the way we have done things vis-a-vis others. And this is within my own organization, and this is in all organizations that consist of human beings. And so it has been difficult, but that's just because the nature of development is very difficult. What I would say is that most good things are not easy. And development is, I think, something that is a good thing. It is a very worthy thing. And so it is definitely worth the challenges and the difficulties. I think I answered all your questions.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Very questions.
They're only your questions.
Identify yourself.
I like questions,
Okay. Yes.
but just don't ask anything too difficult. No, I'm kidding.
My question is a little bit on the diplomacy.
Uh-huh.
So we all knew Nepal received a lot of help from US partnership. So just the word partnership is always two hands, give and take. Nepal has already received so many evidences. But is there something Nepal was able to give on the return? Or was it something like with US says we don't need anything from developing countries? Or was there anything like we expected this during the partnership, but this was not met from Nepal? So
Maybe we'll take a few questions.
No, let me ask you one at a time because I forget. My memory is not as it used to be. Yes, of course US expects something from Nepal, and it's friendship, it's partnership, it's collaboration. I'm glad you put it within the context of diplomacy. Diplomacy means countries need friends, they need allies, they need people that can support each other. And I think this is where development should be seen within two lenses. One is, okay, how are we, as Americans, we really do have this sense of we want to help. We want to go around and we want to help where we can. We don't always do it as well as we can, but we want to. So one part of what we do as development is really helping the people where we go. There is the other part of it, which is diplomacy. Nepal and the United States have been friends for 75 years. That is huge. The United States is the second bilateral partner after UK of Nepal. So we have a long history of friendship. There's so many Nepalis who go to the US. There's so many Nepali Americans. And there's a whole lot of people, I mean, there are actually quite a few people from the US who live here, who have made this their home. But there's a lot of people who come and travel here. And so this is the friendship we're talking about. Within the world, and especially now, countries need friendships with each other. They need friends who see the world in a way they do. They need friends that actually have the same objectives for the world and their own people. And so part of the development assistance, and a huge part of the development assistance that US has been providing Nepal has been within the spirit of friendship. And this is what we did during COVID. When COVID hit, we basically got to work very quickly, and like I said, it wasn't just the United States, it was with a lot of our development partners to make sure that we continued the spirit of friendship with Nepal.
First of all, very good presentation. Do you have your say in the US missionary hospitals? Is it under USAID program? Because that is here for a long time and it goes to remote areas like Okalunga or to Palpa, a few places. I was trying to wonder if that is under USAID program because doctors, nurses, they've been working there for ages.
So the work that USAID does with hospitals and in the health sector is actually very much through the government itself. So our health programming isn't targeted at specific hospitals, it's targeted at the system. So we work very directly with the Ministry of Health to tap into their own system strengthening. We also, as part of this evolution of how we do work, we're putting more and more of our funding directly through the government, through the Ministry of Finance, through the Ministry of Health, to provide that assistance themselves. So we don't necessarily work on specific hospitals. We work directly with the government itself and the Ministry of Health, and again, to take their lead. So the funding goes where they need it to go. What we do is what we call systems strengthening in the health sector. So we have an activity that's been here for several years, and this works at the different levels, and they potentially sometimes work with specific hospitals that are determined to build their systems. So that's what we do in the health sector.
Right. Two more things. The Asian Development Bank
Mm-hmm.
is aiding Nepal to build this road,
Mhm.
mid-highway.
Yeah.
The Asian Development Bank is in it. Why couldn't the USAID also think on that line since you've been here for a long time? Because road construction ultimately develops an area.
This is a question we get all the time. So I have a good answer for you. So Asian Development Bank does build a lot of roads. So do a few others. I don't know if the World Bank does. But the multilaterals actually do a lot of infrastructure. They do. They build roads. They're building a lot of hydropower here. Now most of these are loans. Some of them are grants. So there's a reason. So what I would say first is USAID also does some roads, but they're smaller roads. We don't do the major big infrastructure. We used to in the past, but we don't anymore. And this really has to do with who has a competitive advantage to do what. World Bank and ADB definitely have the comparative advantage to do that. There's some other countries here also who do roads. For us, we do some of the smaller roads. We do some of the roads, the market to road. We do some of the smaller roads for people to be able to get their products to market from their little villages. We do some other infrastructure that has to do with wash sort of things. But the reason we don't do them is because there are others who are doing that better at a larger scale. And so we've been focusing on what is our comparative advantage, which is some of these smaller ones. Thank you.
I have two questions for you. First one is related to development. You focused on mainly development. There are two concepts of development. One is modern development, one is sustainable development.
The first one is moral.
Modern development.
M-O-R-A-L?
Modern
M-O-D-R-N.
Modern development like building road.
Oh, modern, okay.
SDGs.
Okay.
And another one is sustainable development.
Okay.
Close to nature. I can give you one example. You told me us that before 60 years Kathmandu was different and now is different. But we have seen lots of changes in Kathmandu. But what is about the nature? It is also destroying the nature. Even the natural resources of water, sources of water from in Kathmandu, they all have collapsed due to modern development. One example I can also give you, we have a big project over here, Fast Track.
Mm-hmm.
Fast Track is a big project, but Fast Track is very wide in range. But they have not thought about how animal birds, they can migrate from one to another. They have not just I want to say you that not planned or done some way out so that they can easily go from one corner to another, one part to another. But we have one example here.
We got your question, like, do we take care of climate or
Yes,
environment?
development.
Okay, another question you have.
Another question is, since the Madhesi is marginalized, discriminated in every indicator, development, capacity building, and inclusion. So what is your policy for Madhesi?
So, okay, so let me start with your first one, Madesh. I would go back to what I said a few of what I've said before. Our policy for Madesh really has to be within the context of Nepal's policy for Madesh. You know, this is a country that has a new constitution, relatively new constitution. It has a new federalist form of government. And my understanding, since I've been here, is that this was with the intent of providing for all people of Nepal so that there was more inclusion. And so I recognize that it's not perfect right now. I mean, again, it's very interesting that since I've been here, I see so many parallels of Nepal with my own country and with countries all around the world. Inclusion, bringing everybody in who have been historically not included, is a very difficult thing. Because like I said, it's about change. It's about power dynamics. It's about seeing yourself different. It's about incentives. And so it is a very difficult thing. And this is a country that fought a civil war. I don't have to tell you all that. So what has come out of that in terms of what the Constitution now requires versus what is being implemented is a long road. What I would say with regards to what we're doing as USAID is we're taking this dynamic into consideration every day. One of the first places I went to was actually, well, I mean, I travel a lot, but I think very early on when I could travel after COVID, I went to Janakpur. And I've traveled there several times. And every time I went there, one of the things I heard is that this is an area, the Madesh is an area that is not actually getting a lot of support from other donors.
Yeah.
Now, I can't do anything about the government, but what I can do something about what we do as USAID. So every time I went back, one of the things I heard is that, well, there's not a lot of development partners bringing a lot of support to the Madesh. I listened. I went back the second time, I listened again. I went back the third time, I listened again. And so in the past 3 years since I've been here, we've actually expanded what we do as USAID. We have what is called a Feed the Future program, agriculture. It didn't used to be in the Madesh. Now, our agriculture Feed the Future program is also going to be working in the Madesh as one of its zone of influence. We are going to have a community justice program in the Madesh that we didn't have before. One of the two areas where we do our civil society and media programming is also in the Madesh. So we hear you, we have heard you, we do something about it. This goes back to what I said about our Nothing About Us Without Us, inclusive development, how we really need to sit down with the communities and really listen to them. What is it you need? I mean, it was eye-opening when I first started traveling in Madesh and saw, wow, there's a lot of fertile land here that you can do a lot of agriculture. Well, why are we not working in agriculture in the Madesh? Well, now we are going to be. So at least from our side. Your second question about environment. You know, unfortunately, development is about trade-offs. And you have to think about how are you going to balance those trade-offs? It's a major issue, especially in a place like Nepal, that wants to develop economically, and a lot of the drivers of its economic development are from its natural resources.
Yeah.
That puts you in a bind. There is a new, I think, infrastructure policy that has been introduced. And what it says, and we're still trying to figure it out, is that in the areas where they want to bring more hydropower, it is much easier to actually go and not have full environmental considerations. Well, that puts you in a bind, right? Hydropower is a huge driver of economic growth here, but it also has environmental impact. What do you do about that? I don't have an answer for this. My answer is, though, that every single one of these questions and trade-offs has to bring the community together to discuss. Because the communities have to make a decision for themselves. What is more important to me? my environment at this point, or economic growth? These are not easy questions. But I think as many people as you have in that conversation is what becomes important.
What is
So-
your policy on this?
I mean, our
Do you have a
policy,
special policy?
everything
or
that
not?
we do,
That is my question.
our policy is everything we do has to have an environmental impact
Yeah.
analysis and survey.
Yeah.
So, and the funny thing is, as a mission director, there's a whole lot of stuff I can delegate to my deputy or to others. This one I cannot. This one I have to sign off on. So everything that we do, every new activity has to do an environmental impact assessment. We have to think about these trade-offs. And so I personally have to read through all of these, and I have to sign off on them. And I've signed off on a lot of those. So that's our policy. But broadly, it's a trade-off.
Probably a similar question. I'm from Madhes. I'm in Province Planning and Policy Commission as a member. I think, as you rightly said, that Madhes has become a priority, and I can see that in the province and I'm in the government, and I can see some of the projects that you're doing there. I'm just wondering how effective that is going, and probably that the assessment that USAID will do in some point of time. But 2-3 things that I wanted to flag that should be our priority, and then I thought that to communicate with you, and that probably it will go so. The one is about the Hulaki Rajmarg. The Hulaki Rajmarg, postal highway. I have traveled I've traveled as a government officer, and as a member of the planning commission, I was traveling to those provinces. And probably that is the space that is the most marginalized space in Nepal, and perhaps nobody is doing some significant work there. I will give you some example of data. In a Madhes province, we have 8 district province. In the 8 district province, the postal highway is just after the Indian border, right?
Yes.
So if you will see from Parsa, from Saptari to Parsa, that's the district. The Saptari is one district and the Parsa is the end of the province too. So we have 46 municipalities are there. One is sub-metropolitan, 3 are sub-metropolitan, and 26 are rural municipalities, and then other municipalities. One of the most significant poverty, the concentrated poverty is in that corridor. Agriculture probably is one of the most dependent population in that corridor. Most of the vulnerable labor migration, what we call it 3Ds, of a danger, decay, all this dangerous work that the Gulf countries they go, and mostly they are from the province, and they are from this corridor. You will see the health indicators are extremely poor, you will see the education indicators are extremely poor, but probably the funding and the work that many, not only USAID but many others are also in the province too, they are somehow working in some comfort region but not in the difficult side of the Madhes province where the more priority should be there. That's the first problem, the Hulaki Rajmarg, because the Hulaki Rajmarg is somehow damned and ignored places for the many diplomatic missions, for the many donor agencies, and not only the Madhes province, but if you stretch out through the 20 districts of Nepal, one of the most vulnerable population that you will see in that corridor, just beside the Indian border and the coastal highway, and that's there. And I think that if we can do something significantly in that marginal space, which is damned and ignored for a long time, for many reasons, that is the space that can significantly advance our SDG goals, poverty alleviation, agriculture productivity, and many other things. So this is the place that can be a priority. Perhaps we need a good research to do that how that place can be makeover on the development side. But that space, that ignored space, has not taken off as a priority for the many decades, not from the Nepal government side also, but not for the many diplomatic missions also. I mean, they have all the big projects. As you said, that the projects are co-designed and all these things, but the project that I see in the Madhes province perhaps is, I don't know how the localization that would be. I can't visualize that localization part of it in the co-creation part of the projects. Second priority.
So what is the question in that then?
So the question is
So
that
what is your, yeah.
the question is that Hulaki Rajmarg, can be one of the priority area
So
of
are
the
you
marginal
asking me
space.
if it could be a priority?
If that can be a priority.
Okay, so
or
let
perhaps-
me answer your couple of questions first, and then we'll go from there. So the first thing you asked was how effective is it going to be that USAID is putting more of its funding in the Madesh? That's up to the Madesh. And let me go back to something I said earlier about a relationship evolving, right? I think this is where we really have to think about our relationship between the US government, USAID, and Nepal evolving. The responsibility, we each have responsibilities, right? But there is a responsibility for the communities and for the country itself where we go. And the effectiveness of everything that we as USAID does, it's really dependent on the communities and the local governments where we work. So when we go into a place, we can't guarantee success. We cannot. We each do our best. We bring our resources, whether it's funding, whether it's human resources, whether it's experts, and we bring that in with an intention to bring about change. But the ultimate success of anything we do is really not dependent on us. It's really dependent on the partners in the communities, the local government, the provincial governments, federal government, all of that. So again, I think we're just gonna have to see how effective they are. I can't guarantee anything. And again, this is the difficulty with development. This is the challenge of development. Everybody plays a part, and we all have to play our part. And in terms of your second question, so Nepal is a huge country with incredible need for resources. And even all of the development partners coming together are not going to be able to do everything. We just cannot. And this is why we not talk about partnerships and leveraging. It's what do we bring in and what does Nepal bring in? We actually do work in very remote communities. One of the most impactful visits I had in my time here was to Mugu and to Jumla. And I literally saw communities that are, it takes days to walk to. They're like in the middle of some hill somewhere. So we do that. But again, this goes to the trade-offs. Where are we putting our funding where it is most efficient, effective, productive? And so we have just started going into Madesh because agriculture is potentially a huge driver. We're gonna have to think about these local communities because if we put money in one place, if we put resources in one place, it doesn't go elsewhere. And this is again where there has to be a conversation about trade-offs. And these are conversations that the country has to have. These aren't decisions that we as USAID can make. We can't decide for Nepal, well, this community is more deserving than other. This is where it goes. What we can do is have conversation with the government at the different levels, with the communities, to say, okay, this is the limited resources that we have. Where does it work best for you? And again, it also depends on time. At this moment, maybe this is the best place to put our funding. Maybe 5 years from now, we move to a different place. So I think it's really important to think about this is how these decisions are made. And then ultimately, who is responsible and what does a partnership looks like? But you had another question.
And another question is about the Chure Bhavar, the product climate Madesh. Chure Bhavar like
It's a mountain range.
It's a mountain range.
Lower Himalayas, lower Himalayas.
Okay.
So that should be because now the Madhya province will face the severe problem of the water crisis in this upcoming summer, and then the Chure Bhavar is where now the many of the unfortunately the urban ministry has put many new cities there, city projects, and that can damage the Chure Bhavar as a prospect for the restoring the climate and the things like this. So probably the Chure Bhavar is also the place where, at least when I am in the government and I see the project, I don't see enough projects on that side of the Chure Bhavar, and that can also be somehow a priority. I mean, we also think that should be a priority.
So that's great. And
Idea
again,
sharing, and not a question as such.
So, and again, what I would say is prioritization and reprioritization is a really important part of what we all do. because, again, we can't do everything because we just don't have the resources. I hope the country eventually does. And again, this is where economic growth comes in. But at this moment in time, it's really important to figure out what is the priority right now. And if something becomes a priority, something else becomes deprioritized. And so continuing to have these conversations, becomes even more critical, because Nepal really is, well, I mean, most countries are at most times, but there is a really important time for Nepal, right? Because it has a relatively new constitution, it has a federal system of government, decision-making and rules and regulations and who decides on those become really key. And so who makes those decisions for Madhesh? Who makes those decisions for Karnali? Who makes those decisions for Bagmati? Again, who's at the table when those decisions get made? Because this is another critical thing. Just making decisions isn't enough. I go to communities a lot, right? And I ask, so who was at the table when these decisions were being made? Were the farmers themselves at the table when these laws and regulations were being made? Were the women at the table when you were making decisions about gender, what do you call it, the gender something, budgeting, gender response? I mean, I literally have been to meetings here where there are conversations about gender responsive budgeting and there are no women at the table. So again, this is where responsibility comes in. I actually had a conversation with the mayor a while ago who was talking about gender responsive budgeting. And I asked him who was at the table. And this was a table where there were no women there. So again, I think this is what makes development incredibly difficult, because if people aren't used to having certain people at the table, they will just tell you, well, we don't have anybody who's competent to be at the table. And this is where we have to really shift our thinking, shift our behavior, and making sure that the people, and again, when we talk about nothing about us without us, it's not just development partners who have to take that into consideration. It's the country itself as it makes its own decisions. Nothing about us without us means you don't make decisions for communities without actually having meetings where you inform the public that this meeting is taking place, and you create spaces for them to actually come in and have these conversations. So what you're asking about becomes a community decision. What is the priority? Is the priority to focus at the big picture here in Madhesh, or at these communities here? And again, those are decisions that we can't make by ourselves. These are decisions that we will rely on the communities to tell us about, and tell us about the trade-offs.
We're running out of time, but let me still take last two questions. That's one
I
thing
haven't heard from any of the women. I'm telling you, it's only been the guys. I knew you were going to ask a question because I think you asked me a tough question some time ago. All right.
That's one thing.
My name is Chandani Aman. I am from Media at Gorkhaputra, Delhi. My question is regarding LDC graduation. How could USAID support after LDC graduation in 2026? Because Nepal lost lots of support after the graduation.
Yeah, so I know that this has been a concern for the government, because once Nepal graduates, then the nature of the assistance that it receives becomes different in terms of the kind of loans it gets, the kind of interest loans and all that, in terms of budget support. I can speak from the side of USAID, which is that USAID support, type of support to Nepal is not dependent on that. We provide support, we have always provided grants. So our way of providing support has always been grant as USAID, it will remain grants. Now, there are other parts of the US government that, for example, the Development Finance Corporation, who provides loans and loan guarantees to banks, but that's a very different thing. USAID has always provided grants, that's what we do. So ours will not change. And the amount of funding that we provide also is not dependent on LDC graduation. The amount of funding that USAID provides to any country is really dependent on our Congress, and our Congress makes those decisions based on literally what's going on around the world, and I think we all know what's going on around the world, and what is going on in that country at that moment. So there's a lot of considerations. So specifically for LDC graduation from USAID, that's not going to change the way we work, the type of funding we provide, and the kind of relationship we have had.
Thank you. Thanks to Dr. Pomo for this wonderful initiative, and thanks to you for highlighting USAID and US government's support here in Nepal. Maybe I introduce myself because I'm putting some questions that have some reference. I lead an NGO, Media Action Nepal, and I'm working with your government through Media Freedom Coalition. Maybe you are aware about that. This is a 50 governments partnership globally, and I lead CSOs there as one of the elected co-chairs, along with my colleagues from International Press Institute and Public Media Alliance. And I'm working closely with the USAID and FCDO, who are the co-chairs of Media Development Working Group within Media Freedom Coalition. So I lead 22 organizations globally as the Media Development Working Group, but also I'm contributing through Embassy Network Working Group within 22 organizations that we are the part of Media Freedom Coalition Consultative Network. I thank you for your support engaging media here in Nepal through Media and Civil Society Mutual Fund in past through FSI. Also, currently you announcing about your engagement through, I guess, Asia Foundation that you are engaged in Malaysia. Media here in Nepal is today captured by politicians and business people. So a lot of concentration we see today when it comes to media development issues is more concerned about, asking media people to be accountable, fair, engaging in countering disinformation or misinformation. Very little has been done, or I would say in my observation for last, dedicated 10 years in outside Nepal, that very less has been done in the area of addressing justice, mainly impunity for crimes against journalists. Any thoughts of your organizations? You are wrapping your visit, I know, but I think any thoughts or any idea about engaging civil society organizations here in Nepal, ending impunity for crimes against journalists, mainly addressing the agenda of SDG, that is justice. That's one thing. Also,
so you're asking about crimes against journalists?
Yes, crimes against journalists,
For reporting, like investigative journalism sort of thing?
Yes. In the recent day, or that of the past, the conflict era, justice sort of things, many journalists were killed. US is, in the Media Freedom Coalition, it is the executive board member. So globally, you have a lot of contributions, but given the context of Nepal, I think the issues of justice, pardon me if I'm misinformed, if I have little knowledge, but I think there is no informed decisions on part of the development sector engaging what you are calling localization, So I think it is high time for development partners to check into why media's watchdog role has been weakened along these years, They have contributed a lot, but...
Yeah, I mean, what I would say about that is, I'm afraid I don't have a great answer for you. What I would say is that unfortunately, this is within a global media context, right? You talk about, who owns media. It's changing all around the world, who owns media, including in the US. And it is not like it used to be, right? 50 years ago, small media, where people actually had more funding for it. And I have to admit, I don't know a lot about the internal media environment here within Nepal, so I don't have a good question for you. But as I hear your question, for me, it really is within the bigger context of what is happening to media globally. And whether we actually all need to think about it from more of a global sense. Do you have another? Yeah, sorry, I don't have a great answer for you for that one.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
But 35 journalists were killed here in Nepal during the conflict. 5 went missing. Only 3 of the cases sorted out through these transitional justice instruments. So almost, there is sort of free censorship. If someone dares to report about some corruption, investigative stories, they would go aside and they would say, oh, we don't have to report it. Because
what is it from a developing community that you think would be helpful?
Sorry?
So what from your perspective is something that would be helpful for you from a developing
I think
community?
the agenda of justice alongside the SDGs, and that needs to be prioritized in our observations. That has unfortunately not been prioritized here in Nepal.
From a developing community.
Yeah, that is one thing. Also, there is no political commitment on that. So maybe my follow-up question is whether development sector is driven by the political, interest of the coalitions here in Nepal. Maybe, the justice idea, it is globally Nepal is something, there is very little or nothing has been done in terms of providing justice to the people in general of the human rights violations.
Yeah.
But that
So
operates.
I think the quick response to you would be, and again, I would take you back. Our agenda as development partners are not driven by specific political parties in the country. They are driven based on what the country prioritizes. So again, and I would go back to the responsibility that USAID and other development partners have vis-a-vis the country itself. For things to change and for things to be prioritized, it is the priorities of the country. It is what it drives. Now, when it comes to issue of human rights, that's obviously very different. When it comes to specific issues of human rights, there's certain values we all hold, there's certain things that the US government is members of, and those things obviously we push. But your specific question of whether something is driven by politics of a country, the answer is, it is not driven by political parties of a country, but it is very much driven by the priorities that a country puts on itself. Having put aside things that obviously have to do with human rights issues. So again, I think that it really has to be kept in mind that a role a development partner can play is within a context and within responsibilities and accountabilities and priorities that that country puts forward. And again, so maybe, I don't know if there's any other questions, but we are running out of time, but maybe this is a good place to really take us back to where I started the conversation, which is this evolving relationship. And I think we all have to really understand this evolving relationship between what are historically called donors and recipients to really one of partners. And this is difficult because, again, we have become used to a certain way of working with each other, but we really have to change that. So we have to change the language we use to what are you doing, to how are we prioritizing jointly? How are we partnering toward a goal that we both share? And sometimes we don't share the same goal, and so then we have to have a conversation. So the reason I started this conversation was to talk about the evolving nature of our relationship. It's really because of that. It is not an easy thing to do, but as our agency has evolved, and as the United States has evolved, so has Nepal and its institutions. And so again, I think we have to really think about the role we each play as our organizations and as individuals within other organizations, and really keep in mind that, and I think maybe this goes to your question of why is USAID here? What do we want in exchange and in return? It's a friendship. That's what we want. And it means both of us have a role, and that's been evolving.